Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Importkompaniet at the Edge, where we are going to discuss energy solutions for the Arctic during the next 90 minutes. And welcome to the streaming audience as well. My name is Fridtjof, and I've been asked by the organizers, Fridtjof Nansen Institute and UIT, the Arctic University of Norway, to moderate this event. Now, I have a background in journalism and communication, and I do look forward to discussing the energy transition with the Arctic perspective here today. And I hope that you in the audience will participate actively as well, and I'm going to get back to how you can do that in just a moment. Now, first, just one practical information. If the alarm is to set off, we should just exit quietly through one of the emergency exits. They are there, and gather outside the entrance of the hotel. But as far as I know, there are no exercises planned today. The energy transition is, not surprisingly, a topic that several events at this year's Arctic Frontiers are covering. We all know that we need to transform our energy systems from fossil to renewable energy sources to reach our climate goals. And it has to happen yesterday. But what are the best suited solutions for that transition in the Arctic? And how do we ensure an energy transition that strengthens security and ensures growth, or at least maintains the foundation for local communities? Is it at all possible, feasible, and desirable in a region with such harsh conditions and sparse population? Well, one of the many great advantages of the Arctic region is its abundance of renewable energy. Primarily wind. Suffices to just step outside the hotel and you get a reminder of that. And how can we use this resource more effectively, responsibly, and sustainably? Now, these are just a couple of the questions that we're going to ask during this particular event. And we will start with two presentations. Then the speakers will engage in a panel discussion with three other panelists who are representing policy and industry. And as I mentioned earlier, I do encourage you in the audience to take part in that discussion. Now, you have two options for this. You can use either your hair physically or digitally. You can use the digital tool of Slido, so you can just scan the QR code and formulate your question or comment in the forum that you enter once you enter this code. Now, the important thing there is to read through whatever is inside the forum already, because it could be that someone beat you to it and asked the same question that you would like to ask. So instead of formulating that once more, you can just click like, and that is going to enhance the relevance of the question or the comment. So that's also a way of helping me out, so thank you so much in advance for doing that. Now, the second option is, and I can just click for the actual QR code itself. The second option is for those of you who are present here at the physical event and who prefer analog solutions. You can just raise your hand, and we have a microphone ready. So just give me a sign whenever I give the option to do so. Does it all sound good? Yes, quiet nodding, perfect. We are going to dive into the program. Now, the first presentation is going to give us a good understanding of the Norwegian energy system and how it is related to the climate goals that we have committed ourselves to. Research Professor Tor Håkon Jackson Inderberg at Fridtjof Nansen Institute, the FNI, he's going to give us useful insight in what the drivers and the pressures are for energy developments in northern Norway. He calls it the energy crunch, and I'm curious to find out what he means by that. But before I leave the stage to Tor Håkon, a short introduction of him. He has a PhD in political science, and he's worked at the FNI for more than 13 years. He's particularly interested in examining how governance and policy influence the development of sustainable energy solutions. Working as a principal investigator, project manager, and/or work package leader of several research projects, Tor Håkon has gained substantial expertise in wind energy, energy transitions, and regulatory frameworks. And some of that expertise is going to be shared with us now, as Tor Håkon Inderberg is about to enter the podium. Be careful of the screens, but you can enter, and you can all give him a warm welcome on the way up.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. I hope to be able to do justice to that. I come from Fridtjof Nansen Institute, and we do different areas of research. So my part of that, I'm part of the research group on energy and climate, and we also have Per Ove Eikeland here, and we have a new representation in a way for at the Arctic frontier. So we're very excited to be here, and I hope to be able to hopefully throw up some perspectives at least in terms of energy transition and some of the challenges for Norway and Northern Norway. So I have three goals, I think, for this presentation. And the first one is to give some sort of a status on some of the developments and challenges within particularly the electricity system. And also I would like to indicate some possible pathways for the future and directions. And finally, I'll try to highlight the role of municipalities a little bit extra, because that is changing and it's becoming ever more crucial in what is going on in Norway. In my presentation, I'll shift a little bit from the national perspective and increasingly to the northern perspective before we end up at the municipalities, which is the end stop of this presentation. But first, a little bit of background, since we have an international audience here as well. We have in Norway a legally binding climate target of 55% emission reductions by 2030. This is quite ambitious. And it currently looks like we'll be quite far off reaching that goal, but it's still lying there in the as a background, and a very important background. And one of the key messages from here, from my presentation, is that this will require significant increased ambitions in terms of energy and energy use, and particularly use of electric energy. So electricity import-export balance is going to be, or is expected to be, around 0 for 2030, and slightly positive for beyond that, again, rising a bit on less import dependence on around 2035. And this is what I refer to as the energy crunch. Just to take that, I'm sure we'll discuss more on that in the panel. So a key driver in the Arctic Norway is the decision to electrify the Melkøya gas processing plant in Hammerfest. That's an immediate driver, but there are also numerous other developments that we need to account for. So this is not the only one, but it's a major one. So northern developments, I argue, they hinge on electricity, and then is a question of how this can be managed well. So if you go back to think about the national perspective, Norwegian perspective, basically what we're trying to do here is to remove this bit of the energy system that is grey here, which relies on fossil fuels. So, and this image is from 2018, but it's still almost the same as today. The wind power bit is a bit thicker, and that's the main difference. And so how we're going to do that is really, it's a limited set of options in terms of replacing fossil energy use with non-fossil, low-carbon energy use. Basically, it's electrification, energy savings, hydrogen, and biofuels, and possibly also carbon capture and storage, of course, which is not replacing energy use. That's a slightly different area. But when it comes to direct energy use, we have more or less these four main strategies. So they're not mutually exclusive, of course, and they are feasible in different ways, and how they're going to end up the constellation of the end picture depends on numerous different elements, national strategies, different policies, how vested interests influence these, technology, price developments, and other aspects, of course. But what we do know, what I'm quite sure about, is that they will influence electricity prices and also then economic developments. So therefore, the three lower ones, in a sense, hydrogen, biofuels, and energy savings, will be important, but for different segments. Electrification stands out as the main national strategy, and it's the key element to illuminate, and that's what I will focus on in the further talk here. So that's the primary strategy, also for securing climate targets and economic developments in the north. And also in terms of electricity, there is a need for the diversification of generation, and also import is important for security. Several sources, I touched on that, drive this need. I mentioned about Melkøya, but it's also other types of industry. Hydrogen production and data centers. These are the key drivers of increased demand of electric energy currently. In all the grid plans of the northern grid companies, these elements stand out. Two other examples of this is, of course, the Melkøya electrification. We produce, that's the only numeric term I'm going to use, I think, is terawatt hours. We produce nationally about 159 terawatt hours nationally in Norway and every year. Melkøya, electrification of Melkøya will use 3.6. Northern price zone. I didn't mention say too much about the price zones that was on the map, but the northern price zone it produces about 27.8 terawatt hours annually. So it's the electrification, new demand on the electrification is quite significant. I'll not talk too much about the grid itself, but it does require significant upgrade of the grid. But my main focus here is on the new generation of electricity, the need for that. And as many will know in this room, NVE, the national regulator and licensing authority, has initiated several wind power licensing processes, and some of these are highly controversial, which we'll hear more about, I think, from Claudia. So that's one aspect of the demand side. The other aspect in electricity consumption is a number of data centers. And if we look at this curve, the NO4, this curve is the northernmost. So it's from January 2022 until end of last year. It's risen with quite a lot, up to 20 gigawatt hours. And it looks like it's going to increase more. So we will have increased demand of electricity from data centers as well. Also, what's been signed in as connection inquiries is really hydrogen production, and they are also quite electricity intensive. So in the scenarios from NVE for 2030 and 2035, we see a reduction in the northern price area, a reduction of surplus electricity annual. Going from today, it's just over 8 terawatt hours to 2030, depending on the scenario, it's closing down towards zero in all the scenarios, not entirely down to zero, but it means that prices are likely to increase, and the price estimates in these scenarios, they show indications of prices more similar to the southern levels. At the same time, the wind power licenses, the wind power license processes that are ongoing, marked on the map here, all of these are unlikely to get the license, but they are in process currently with all the controversies and the challenges that they encompass. So I'm just showing that is actually the main point in terms of new production before 2030. There is not much else likely to come online. And that kind of hints at the possible options for new electricity generation by 2030. So land-based wind might be up to 4 terawatt hours by 2030. That is, from a system perspective, the only likely one to be able to do much in terms of bringing in new generation. Offshore wind will not contribute by 2030. It might contribute later. Nuclear energy is high on the agenda of all the newspapers. It's a wild card. It's very difficult to say anything about that. But it's quite sure that it will be very unlikely to contribute anything by at least before 2040. Also, I mentioned grid. I won't focus too much on that, but that is a key limiting factor for economic development in areas around rurally, particularly in northern Norway. There are initiatives by Statnett for revenuing that, but it's not going to happen overnight, obviously. But there are processes there. Also, it's important to mention that Swedish developments, we have been quite dependent on Swedish import from Sweden in northern Norway, but that's likely to be less available for this time span that I'm talking about here. Okay, one should not finish with a conclusion slide of a complexity like this. But this is my final slide. I did this because to highlight the role of the municipalities. So previously, the licensing process for wind power has been the left part of this graph. And basically, it's been a one-stop shop in a sense that where the developer have given early notice to the NVE and it's gone through the motions. And if it's been found to be worthy of a license in terms of having less negative impacts than positive impacts, it was to be granted a licensing decision. That has fundamentally changed as of July 2023 with the new licensing scheme that was introduced. Now the municipality is a key actor and will have a veto on any license for wind power that is in the process. So, and they can say no at any stage up until this stage. So they follow in a parallel stream. I'm not going to go into the details here, obviously, but so they follow in a parallel stream where they can say no until right before the licensing decision of the NVE, and if they do, it will not happen. This, of course, makes the municipality a key actor, and an even more important actor than I have been in Norwegian wind power developments, and in this situation also for developments of new renewable energy that I have hope I've carried the message through that there is a need for new electricity in the north. And I think we'll have to do any other arguments in the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tor Håkon. And I'm glad that you're going to be back, because then we can dwell on some of your points. And it was a very useful insight in the Norwegian energy system. And we are going to stay in the realm of wind power and also the power of local municipalities, as we're going to invite the next speaker to the podium. Claudia Cheng, she is a PhD candidate at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, and her research focuses on the role of hydrogen in the wind power projects in the Arctic, particularly in connection with energy justice and community engagement. Claudia, she has an academic background in social sciences, and now she's going to invite us on a trip to Berlevåg, a small community in Finnmark, where the local authorities are doing all they can to keep the community alive. And a tiny spoiler alert, wind energy plays an important role in those efforts. How this natural and renewable resource can help save a small community and at the same time ensure a just transition is something Claudia Cheng is now ready to elaborate for us. So please give her as well a warm welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Ruth. As Ruth has mentioned, my research focuses on hydrogen. And you might wonder, what has hydrogen got to do with wind? Well, it turns out you need a lot of renewable energy to produce wind, to produce hydrogen. To what do I want to say? Yeah. So besides seafood, Northern Norway is also very famous for wind, as maybe all of you have experienced in the last 2 days. And so this one here. Unfortunately, onshore wind is a controversial topic in Norway. And protests are rising not only from the Sami reindeer people, herders, they're also coming from non-indigenous people. And why are people protesting against onshore wind? Is it because they don't believe in climate change and so they don't want to contribute into this low carbon energy transition? Well, it turns out that the reason could lie in how energy transition happens. So research has shown that there is a possible link between social resistance and energy, sorry about the spelling there, energy justice or injustice. So what is energy justice? Well, energy justice can be understood by these 3 key concepts or tenets, we call it. We have distributive justice. You can understand energy justice through procedural justice and recognition justice. So distributive justice, as its name suggests, is about looking at the distribution of the burdens and benefits of a project and how it's being distributed among all the stakeholders and the right holders. Procedural justice looks at the fairness and the transparency of the decision making, whether it's inclusive, whether information is out there for people to access, whether the decision making is non-biased. Recognition justice looks at who are the people involved in those decision making. Are the rights of the marginalized groups or the indigenous people taken into consideration when they decide to go for a project? So one of the reasons why I chose Berlevåg as my case study is that it's one of those few wind power plants that I know that has few conflicts, and I was curious to know why, whether it really exists that there's no conflicts. So using the energy justice, I analyzed on Berlevåg. So before I begin the analysis, maybe a little bit about Berlevåg. Where is Berlevåg? Well, we are there, Tromsø, in the east part. Berlevåg is located in the northeast part of Norway, in the county of Finnmark, this region. And Finnmark is the northernmost county of Norway, which shares a border with Russia. Like many of the rural communities in northern Norway, Berlevåg is a traditional fishing town. Unfortunately, in the last few decades, fishing industry is declining. So the municipality has to find a way to support the local economy, and that's where onshore wind comes in. But we know, onshore wind, we need land space. Yes, Norway has a lot of space, northern Norway has a lot of land, but most of this land is designated as reindeer grazing districts. The colors you see on the map, this shows the different districts of the reindeer grazing land, and Berlevåg lies in Reindeer District 7. Since 2005, the Finnmark Act was enacted, and this transferred the management of the land, 95% of the land here, to the residents of Finnmark through an agency, an estate management agency called FIFO, or Finnmark Estate. And this Finnmark Act has some history that can be traced back to the ratification of the ILO, the International Labour Organization Convention 169, and the Article 27 of ICCPR, which is International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And this international covenant basically offers protection for the indigenous people. So, having known that, building a wind park in Finnmark is not as easy as other places because you need to consider the local acceptance of the host municipalities, but also you need acceptance from the Sami indigenous people. Now, if I go back in history, Berlevåg, in the 1970s, they had about 1,900 people. And today, we're looking at less than 900 people. So time is running out. If they don't do anything, there can be a social collapse. So what is Berlevåg municipality trying to do to reverse this trend? Well, they have this idea to use the wind from the wind park to create an industrial park. And in this industrial park, they intend to have an ammonia production factory. In case you don't know what's the connection between ammonia and hydrogen, ammonia is a derivative of hydrogen. And using hydrogen, you can produce ammonia, and ammonia can then be used to fuel ships that are sailing around the Arctic. And with the ammonia production, you have two byproducts. You have oxygen and you have waste heat. With the oxygen, there's a possibility to create new industry out of land-based agriculture. And with the waste heat, you can use that heat to create a new industry with greenhouse farming. And with all these new industries, then there's a possibility of creating new jobs or local jobs so that people will be attracted to move to Berlevåg and settle there. So what are the key lessons I have learned through looking at the energy justice going on in Berlevåg? Well, first, energy justice processes manifest in not only at the local level, but also in the international and national level. What I mean is, if you implement all the best practices to have the best energy justice within the local level, that's not enough. You could still have injustices because of existing state policies that are not favorable to the project or existing infrastructure, as Tu Håkon mentioned earlier. And these policies and infrastructure would then cause delay in getting the project on speed. And for Berlevåg, they don't have time to wait for this delay. Any delay in their project means a delayed opportunity, or even worse, missed opportunity to create jobs to build their community. So a good example, we saw the complex license processing process earlier. This is what it took for Berlevåg to get their license, 7 years. From the time they had notified the authorities, they got their license only 7 years later. And part of the reason was because at that time, this is the early phase where Norway decided they want to invest in wind. But at the same time, they didn't expect that many wind applications. So the authorities were overwhelmed by all the applications. But it was also not the priority for the government to invest into more resources to develop this onshore wind. So there's this contradictory process going on. And then you think things will go faster? Well, no. After getting the grant, it took another 15 years and still ongoing to build half of what they were granted to build, which was 200 megawatt. Today, they only have 100 megawatt. And one of the prime reasons was because of the lack of capacity in the transmission capacity in the grid. And that has to do with the fact that there was not enough demand, and so they had to wait. Earlier, also Tu Håkon mentioned the electrification of the Balkøya LNG plant. If that happens, then there will be a high power plant, the high power line that will be connected to the wind park all the way to Balkøya. The good news is that the transmission capacity will increase, the grid will be better, but that means there will be less energy, or maybe no energy left for Berlevåg, which means less jobs, and we have a social collapse. So second lessons that we've learned from this research is that the perceptions of justice and fairness is not static. It varies with time, especially when we are going into unknown territory. There are always unforeseen consequences and impacts that we didn't take into account. So in order to have a just energy transition, we need to establish trust by engaging continuously with the different stakeholders and by being willing to change the plans. And a good example was the Rakogvida wind park. The text that is highlighted in blue here shows the 2 times in the construction process where the plans were changed because there were concerns coming from the summit, parliament, and the reindeer herders. And this was also made possible because the developer told us himself that they believe in the value of cooperation and not compensation. And long-term engagement is very key in order to minimize resistance. And final point on the judgment of what is fair and just. It's a very subjective term. But here, in the case of wind parks, we need to consider the historical context. We need to consider the motivations for having the renewable energy projects. So in the case for Belarus, we've seen that they need jobs more than money. Money is important. I'm not saying that it's not important. It's important, but if they don't have jobs, then there's no community, and there's no community. Having all the money is not going to do anything. And the final point about the limits of growth. I know it's probably not a very popular topic to talk about, but it's nonetheless important. Wind is unlimited resources, but land is not. In order for Sami and non-Sami people to coexist in the same area, in the same space, there needs to be a mutual understanding of what we want to try to achieve, what kind of growth we want to achieve, how much growth is really enough for both to coexist. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You can actually stay put. Thank you, Claudia. And please stay put and have a seat there, because we're going to discuss a little bit now. So I'm going to re-invite Claudia to sit, to Håkon. Take a seat, and you're not going to be alone, because we have 3 more chairs, and they are reserved for the following excellent people. So it's Hilde Rød, who is Senior Vice President for Climate and Sustainability at Equinor, and we can applaud them all up to the stage. Then we have Petter Bjørkli, who is Cluster Leader at Energi i Nord, Energy in the North. An applause. And last but not least, Benjamin Furuli, who is Deputy County Mayor at the County of Troms, representing the Conservative Party, which is Høyre. Nice to see you all. I hope that everyone can see you sitting there, but if not, you just have to make your backs a little bit longer, and welcome all of you. And dear audience, please remember that you can ask questions either through Slido. It's quite quiet in Slido at the moment. I'm not sure if I have no, I don't have the code here. So if anyone in this room wishes to ask a question or comment, just give me a little sign, and we'll have a microphone ready for you. Okay, so, and I think, yeah, thank you. There, I'm going to press, and then we have the QR code as well. So go ahead and have the questions ready. So since this panel consists of 3 people that we haven't heard from earlier in this event, I thought we could give them a chance to introduce themselves and maybe comment a bit as well on the things that we've heard so far. And I would like to start with you, Hilde Rød. As I mentioned, you are the Senior Vice President for Climate and Sustainability at Equinor. And if anyone doesn't know of Equinor, that is Norway's largest energy company, mainly producing oil and gas, but you also have stakes in renewable energy sources. Now, we heard both Tor Håkon and Claudia mention Melkøya, which is Equinor's LNG plant near Hammerfest in Finnmark. And the LNG production at Melkøya constitutes Norway's largest point source of emissions. So electrifying the production at Melkøya means reducing CO2 emissions by 850,000 tons per year, and that equals 2% of Norway's emissions. So in other words, that is an important climate action for Norway. But it also means that much more electricity, as Claudia mentioned, needs to be made available for Equinor. So that has sparked, naturally, several discussions, and I don't expect Hilda to answer to all of them now, but I'm just going to mention it just for the sake of the discussion. So there are many levels of the discussions. Electrification means prolonging the gas production and hence the fossil era, potentially slowing down the necessary energy transition, so that's one discussion. Another one is that electrification will require generation of new electricity, as Håkon mentioned, with potential conflicts, as we've just heard, for both nature and human rights, i.e. indigenous people's rights. The transmission grid needs an upgrade, and prioritizing access is also going to be an issue, as we've heard. So, as the SVP for Climate and Sustainability at Equinor, Hilde, you do play a key role in projects like the electrification of Melkøya. So could you first of all just give us a status of the electrification project now? Because we keep talking about things that are going to happen, but where are you right now? And maybe at the same time give us an insight in how you're working from Equinor's side to balance industrial growth with environmental and societal impact. So go ahead, you have a couple of minutes.
Thank you. That was a long and rich question for a couple of minutes.
I'll
do my best. And thanks for inviting me to an important discussion. I think, first of all, I and everyone in Equinor recognizes how complex and challenging this discussion is, and I think it's one that we see in regarding the Melkøya project, but I think in general, transition means electrification. It means for the world the need to develop more renewable energy, and with that comes dilemmas and trade-offs and balancing acts. We have a nature crisis and a climate crisis at the same time. And there is also the question of how do you involve local communities. So I think this type of both conflicts and discussions and difficult balancing acts is something that we will probably see quite a lot of and need to have good debates around. So there are no sort of very easy solutions in the transition, unfortunately. But status quo is also not a good solution as we are facing a climate crisis.
True.
With regards to the status of the Snøhvit Future project and electrification, the construction has started and major contracts have been awarded. So that's the status. It is started and ongoing. And we also assume that there will be around 1,700 jobs in the construction or project phase related to this. But I think the most important thing here is, of course, also why. Why do we think this is an important measure and an important climate measure? Why are we doing this? And there are several reasons. And one of them is the question around energy supply, secure and reliable energy supply. We've seen over the last few years, in particular, the role that Norway and also Equinor, as a very large producer on the Norwegian continental shelf, that we play to be a reliable energy producer to Europe, and how important that is in the current security setting. And Melkøya plays an important part of that. I think in a normal year it represents around 5% of Norway's energy gas export. So that's important. Of course, there are jobs here as well. And Equinor employs around 1,200 people in northern Norway, around half of it at Hammerfest and Melkøya, and there are. It's the same number of people involved in supply chain, etc. So this is about prolonging the lifetime of a very important asset, gas asset, with all the jobs and economic benefits, both for society, but also for this region that comes with that.
Can I just shoot in? Do you see a problem in prolonging that activity as long as we, on a global level, are talking about the need for transforming the entire energy systems from the fossil to renewables?
I think we all see that transformation is going to take a lot of time. The energy mix is still 80% fossil fuel based in the world, and natural gas has a role to play for a very long time. And I think the type of natural gas supply that Norway can bring with low carbon footprint related to production is exactly the type of fossil fuels that is needed in the transition. We need that while we build out the alternatives, and just shutting down existing plants is really not something that gives an orderly transition. So I don't see that as an issue. I think this is about how do we, as we build out the alternatives, also ensure that we have energy and produce that with the lowest possible emissions. And that is, of course, where the electrification comes in, because this is one of the largest emission points in Norway, 850,000 tons of CO2, as you said. And there are also limited options for Norway to what are the alternatives. This is a really significant emission cut. The cost of it compared to alternatives, it's one of the most cost-efficient measures. But it does, of course, have challenges. But it's not easy to come up with good alternatives also for Norway. And this is something that will enable gas production then with very competitive footprint, CO2-wise, for a very long time. So we think it's an important part both for us, but also for Norway to reach its climate ambitions.
I would like to give the word to the other two as well, but just one follow-up question when it comes to the electricity that you need. Where are you at the moment for that? Because that's not an easy thing to accomplish either.
No, and we heard about the energy crunch, and I think that's very much at the heart of the discussion. So we have applied, we're an off-taker of electricity, so we have applied for access to the grid and electricity. Of course, this is the government sort of prioritizing, and we've matured. We've also shown examples through Trollvind, for example, how we try to play a constructive part also in energy supply in Norway in general. But we've looked at also alternatives here. But really, for us now, we have applied for access, and we have been granted access. We all know that there needs to be an energy development in this region for that to happen. But that's the status. Okay. So we're not really the developer, but the off-taker.
Yeah, precisely. Thank you so far. You're all going to come back, but let's continue the introductory round, which is quite good introductory round today. Petter Bjørkli. As I said when I introduced you, you are the cluster leader of Energi i Nord. So that's a cluster of different stakeholders from both industry and the power sector in northern Norway, hence the name, which in English translates to energy in the north, to put it easy. The purpose of your cluster is to promote cooperation between the power companies and the large industry actors, aiming at value creation and growth in the region, plus, of course, speeding up the decarbonization of the energy system. Now, Equinor is one of the partners in your cluster, and I know that you fully support the electrification of Melkøya to reach Norway's climate targets. But do you also see the electrification project as an instrument to ensuring the development of local communities in the region? And if so, how and why? Because I guess you're going to say yes, so why is it important?
Not an easy yes to get me out of that. No, first, thanks for having me, obviously. And then just to emphasize a bit on Energi i Nord as a cluster, it consists of industry, both big and smaller companies. It has the energy sector in northern Norway, but we also have research, education, innovation companies, the universities, municipalities from Berlevåg to Bodø. Basically, not entire, but most of the team who are looking into how can we accelerate the energy transition and how can we ensure local value creation from that. So that's the first part. Then on electrification of Melkøya. First, a disclaimer on that part. I live in Hammerfest. And I was born in Hammerfest. I moved from Hammerfest before Melkøya came. The chart which Claudia showed on population in Berlevåg, that was Hammerfest before Melkøya.
Not the same numbers, though.
No, but the same speed of that. So eventually, the number will be 0 in both cases at some point. But electrification of Melkøya is important, in my opinion, for 2 reasons. The first, which we have discussed, is the climate change. We need to act on the climate change. We are now talking a lot about security and that part of the geopolitical side, but we must never forget the climate change. It's still just as important as it has ever been before.
Even more important.
Even more important. And then it's the regional aspect of losing what has become one of the cornerstone workplaces in both Hammerfest, in Finnmark, and in Northern Norway. It's not only the island itself, but it's all the value chain surrounding that, which goes from Kirkenes to Mo i Rana in Northern Norway, and then expand beyond that. And then we have all the other sectors which we are dependent on, fisheries, fish farming, which we also need to decarbonize on some level. So the rush for developing new value chains is important, but we mustn't forget that we need to decarbonize what we already have in order to make them profitable also in the future. The market will more and more increase on being aware that the fish or the energy must be green all the way. And we have now the opportunity to sort of start that process. We are eager, impatient, because it's moving a bit too slow for our taste, at least.
But you heard Claudia mention Berlevåg as an example, and saying that if all the electricity from Raggovidda is going to Equinor, that's going to crush the local community. That's the word she used. And I know that to you, it's important to have these jobs, this value creation, and so on. But at the expense of what and whom, and how do you avoid that?
It's a bit in our culture to sort of say that now we put Berlevåg towards Hammerfest in this discussion. And that's the Northern Norwegian way. It has always been that way. We are a bit hat in hand and competing towards each other. I think that let's work together, as we try to do in our cluster, on basically increasing the cake. It's important to mention that with the electrification of Melkøya, the Norwegian government introduced kraft- og industriløft for Finnmark, or power and industrial lift, to sort of have bad translation for that, which then has speeded up the process of the new 420 kilowatts line going to Eastern Finnmark. That's an extremely important part for Eastern Finnmark to have the opportunity to grow. Then we need to solve the energy production, but without the grid, there's no need to have an energy production, basically.
You're not thinking local distributed use, microgrids,
Well,
and
that's
so on.
and that's my last point. You put me there, but Berlevåg, they are looking into now off-grid production because they are basically test producing green hydrogen today. One of the first places to produce green hydrogen is in Berlevåg. They have shown that it's possible with the power company, with the municipality, with the researchers, everything. It's sort of a microcosmos of what is possible. They have abundance of energy from Raggovidda. They have the third phase of building Raggovidda to expand that, but they can't do it before the grid is in place, because all electricity produced in Norway must be put on the grid. Instead of having a cable from Raggovidda down to Berlevåg Industry Park and start moving. This off-grid production is not regulatory possible. And that's a problem. So we are sort of focusing on the same lines as we have always done, and not speeded up the processes and the bureaucracy to ensure that possibilities, small and big, can be utilized together instead of competing one towards the other.
That brings me over to the final person in the panel, the politician in the panel, Benjamin Furuli. As I mentioned, he's the deputy mayor for the county of Tromsø, deputy county mayor, and you represent the Conservative Party. Being part of the regional administrative level, you're well placed to see the energy transition in a larger perspective than the single municipalities could or should do. However, they have the power, as we heard, literally speaking, to stop wind power projects within their borders through their right to veto. And at the same time, for those who've followed Norwegian deconstruction of nature lately, we see that Norwegian nature is disappearing bit by bit due to a large number of smaller construction projects. That could be industrial parks, it could be cabins, roads, houses, etc., approved by municipal authorities. So first of all, I'm just wondering, do you wish that you had the more power to influence these processes?
Well, I guess I would be lying if I said that I never have had that thought. But I think the correct and truly answer is no. And that's because I believe that if we are to have a just and a fair transition and solve these issues, then we are dependent on having local acceptance on these issues. And I think it's crucial and important that the municipalities have the decisive say in this, because I don't think it would be a good idea for the region to overrule them or national level to overrule them. I think it's important that we work together.
But don't you risk that they're saying no just because they don't, want to, and they don't really see the value that could be added in saying yes on behalf of a greater cause?
Well, yes, and we have some bad examples on that, on municipalities who says no for further to get more information on how both the upsides and downsides in their local areas could be on the energy production. So of course we need a broader perspective and to see the region as a whole, and we are totally dependent on exactly that, and I think also nationally. But my expectation and my clear message to the municipalities is that they have to say yes to the information and have to say yes to see the opportunities in the start, and then they can decide whether or not to go further with the project. Because it's really important that we all work together on this issue.
So how are you doing it in the county on that level? What kind of role are you taking? Are you coordinating things, or are you just being a dialogue catalyst, or how does it work?
Well, right now we are in the starting group of a new regional plan for renewable energy in Tromsø, where we are going to work together with our municipalities and our industries on seeing what are our needs coming forward, what are our opportunities, and what are our challenges. So we are taking a active role there, and I think that is important for us as well. As we are working to influence, of course, national politics and policies. I agree with Petter that things are going too slowly, and the main grid is obviously extremely important for the development of the whole Northern Norway. So we have to speed up these processes, and I think Claudia had an example of how long it could take, and I think we have even worse examples as well on how one thing that we really need takes a lot of time because we have a lot of processes. And when that's said, I don't think that we must jump over some of the challenges that we have, both regarding nature loss. We have important Sami people that we have to make sure that we take care of, but I think that we have to make sure that our processes are as efficient as possible so that we can get further. And I think Melkøya is an interesting example of the importance of this green transition. You know, we could have chosen to shut down Melkøya, or we could have chosen to keep the emissions going and not take our responsibility in cutting climate emissions. But I don't think that would be a good idea. So we need to make sure that our industry is competitive and can deliver important goods, services to the whole world. Yeah.
But do you think then the national energy policy is capable of meeting the needs of people living, for instance, in the northern regions? I mean, how can this be better harmonized in a way? And do you see a role for the counties in that aspect?
Yeah, I think it is possible to make even better processes, and I think that the municipalities now having the decisive say is important, because you ensure that when they have decided and there have been the local processes, it's easier to have a fast track in the national system as well. so make sure that it goes faster when we have decided. So I think there's possibilities, and of course, as I say, this question is so important that we can't say every municipality for itself. So we have to see a region as a whole to make sure that we can make the transition.
Thank you. Now everyone's introduced, and I would like for you to sort of engage in the discussion amongst you. And Claudia, I was thinking when you presented for us, you showed us a construction process of 15 years and more.
Yep.
But actually there were 2 points in that process that where you showed us that there were changes actually in the plans, because there were some objections to the plans, and that was actually a good thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, like the point of the timeline is also to show that there are possibilities for the for different stakeholders and right holders to intervene, even though the license has been granted.
Yeah.
And that is important, because without this, there's so much things we don't know when we are venturing into new lands. And it is better to be prudent, because once you build a wind plant, it's not so easy to just take off. And you don't get back the nature as fast as you want. So we need to be able to have this flexibility to change plans as we go along.
But that also means that we're going to make the processes even longer, doesn't it? Or is it possible to make them more efficient, as Benjamin is voting for?
Well, I mean, I think it's better to have it a just process, because I think from what we have learned from fossil conflict, that even if you push your way and get your way for 10 years, it comes back to you and hits back at you very hard. So
Well, the Fosen case is a very, very strong case when it comes to indigenous rights, and I think they have a license for 20 years or 25 years, and then
25 years.
Yeah, and then it's up to the dialogue whether it's going to be taken down or not. Petter?
Just to sort of give an example of how it could be done. It's not necessarily the answer or the solution, but Tromskraft, the regional power company here, which Benjamin owns 60% or something like that, they have done a possibility study.
Not me personally.
No.
The county.
That would have been something. They have done a possibility study in Nord-Troms, looking into different areas where can a new wind power production facility be placed. By doing so, they have invited in the local municipality, people living there, reindeer, the Sami people doing reindeer herding, to try and find a common ground on where to do so. That's not sort of, they are not obliged to do that by the process, but they know that if they don't do anything in advance, when they're coming to the flowchart of Tor Håkon, there will be obstacles which are prolonging the process, which Claudia thinks about. So there is an upside for the industry to do something in advance in order to keep everybody involved. And I think trust has been, Claudia mentioned it, it's been a topic yesterday. 3 keywords is trust, trust, and trust. And you can't buy trust.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the word soon, but there's actually a question from the audience which is in relation to this, to you, Hilde. The lawsuit brought by the Sami Parliament against the Melkøya project indicates consultation is insufficient. What are your plans to do better on this front?
I think with regards to that lawsuit, Equinor is not party to the lawsuit, so that's against the government. So I think that's something for the government to respond to. What I can respond to is more how we integrate this when we do projects, and stakeholder consultation, of course, being a very important part of that. A part that we have been responsible for with regards to Melkøya is the cable connection to the grid. And there we have worked with extensive stakeholder engagement, and actually ended up choosing a different route for the cable to the grid, and a more costly solution to based on input and requests from local communities, and also due to minimize impact on reindeer herding. So sometimes you can do things in the design phase based on early consultation. So
And even
that
though the
is,
cost is higher on the long term, it's probably going to be better. A
better solution for all, I think. So that's, and sometimes, of course, the hope is that it's possible to find these good solutions in projects overall. But for the lawsuit, which is regarding a different scope, we're not party to it. So I don't think it's right of me to comment on that.
Okay. Tor Håkon?
Yeah, I was just, I think Peter's point here about the law being the minimum requirements is a quite important one when it comes to developing new projects. We have been, I think, in Norway quite inward-looking, and there are a lot of inspiring processes from other countries when it comes to involving parties. And I think it's important also to recognize that not all of the projects I showed there will necessarily go forward, and maybe they shouldn't. Some of them have nature impacts that are unacceptable, and others have implications for Sami life and interests and other aspects. So that will have to go through the process of the municipalities and the licensed authority and the so I think we should be careful about thinking of acceptance as a barrier in that sense. We need to find a system that is transparent and involves sufficiently to create that trust that we're talking about, so we can have legitimate outcomes, or even when parties are in disagreement with the outcome. That's the ideal, at least. It's difficult, but that's...
It is difficult, but of course communication is probably the first step then, and have a dialogue. And there's a question from the audience. What can Norway learn from other northern countries' indigenous ownership models in renewable energy regarding consultation, engagement and compensation? And do you know much of those models, Tor Håkon?
Not in detail, no, but there are lots of countries, like Canada has some programs that are interesting in this regard. I know New Zealand do, in terms of legal documents and processes that secures some involvement. They're not perfect, but we don't have a tradition with project developers venturing out more broadly, I think. So that could be useful. But regarding the shorter deadlines, I think it also is important to recognize that shorter isn't necessarily in conflict with good processes. It can be, but if things are prepared and involved from the get-go at an earlier stage, we can see shorter processes that may work and provide legitimate outcomes as well. It's not easy.
It never is easy. Petter, I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, and with the last question which you gave to Tor Håkon, we are working, and as a topic of this Arctic Frontiers Conference is cross-border. We are working closely with northern Sweden and northern Finland to see how can we sort of develop something together, and the collaboration part of it, what can we increase and do things smarter. The first point on the last question involving reindeer and the Sami people, there is a question actually which we are discussing closely with our Swedish and Finnish partners. Are they in front of us, or are they actually behind us? Are they
when it comes to acceptance?
Yes. Are they now heading into what we are sort of facing in the middle of right now?
Yeah.
And they see signs of more and more pointing to that they are heading onto something now which they are not fully aware of. So
how do you explain that? Because we've had the impression that Sweden has mainly just did what they wanted in many ways.
Sweden have done what they wanted. Finland is also sort of boom. But with the knowledge of other groups being increased, the competence, the fact that we listen more, give them sort of the voice they have needed maybe to take a larger place. And then that might lead to something which we can now sort of show and hopefully bring some solutions to when involving Northern Norway, our researchers, our competence centers being sort of at the pinnacle of the solutions and finding the solutions for what might be one of, well, it's not climate change, it's not security, but it's the third one which we need to solve this conflict we are in the middle of. On another point we can look to Sweden on the positive side is that in Luleå they are investing, I think it's 100 billion Swedish NOK in the next 10, 15 years. They are planning to sort of they need 50 to 70 terawatt hours of electricity. What they saw is that when all these initiatives, industrial initiatives, sort of signed off on the Swedish list for I want a grid connection, there wasn't room enough for everyone.
No.
So someone had to go. But then they thought, wait a minute, the local energy company, Luleå Energy, we must find a solution for this. So the first they did was they assembled all industrial initiatives in a meeting room, close the doors and say, what are your real need? Not your wishes, but what are your real need when it comes to effects?
Sufficiency.
Sufficiency.
Yeah.
Not nice to have, need to have. What are your timelines? When do you need it? And how sort of mature is your project? By doing that one or series of a couple of meetings, they reduce quite a lot of air in the system. So that's also another sort of organizational need I think we need to look into. How do we sort of give access to the grid? What are the demands for industrial companies to have that access and keep that access? Because we aren't using more than we are producing today. It's sort of a theoretical capacity we have a problem on, basically because it's reserved to something.
Worst case scenario.
Yeah, and what are the possibility of all these somethings being a concrete project? That's also sort of a room for improving. And maybe we don't need that much new electricity that we think today, because some projects will never happen.
Benjamin.
There has been implemented national legislation in Norway lately on the demand that the projects that are standing in the queue has to be mature, it has to have progress, and I think that's really important because we can't stop the development for all our existing industries if there are no realism in the projects that are standing in to wait. So I think that's important and good that we have gotten there. But we are also very often discussing we should prioritize what the power goes to, the energy goes to. But that's also quite a difficult discussion.
Yeah, because how do you prioritize?
Yeah,
I mean, is
exactly.
it value creation? Is it the number of jobs? Is it less nature invasive? How to make these prioritizations? And none of you are doing those prioritizations.
No, and it's really difficult as well. And the data centers are often those who are mentioned as the worst examples of what we do not want to use our energy for. But at the same time, we need the data center also because of a security issue.
Yeah, and they are the foundation as well for many other services.
Yeah, of course. And I think coming forward, we have to make sure that because we are in a new geopolitical landscape security-wise, we need to make sure that we are energy as much as we can, at least self-sufficient in Northern Norway as well, because we are situated in an extremely important area, geopolitical. We have heavy military presence in our region, and it's important that we have production to adjust to that. At the same time as we have grids that are redundant and can make sure that we get it there we need it.
I have two questions for you, well, two audience questions I'm going to combine. I think you're the closest one to reply to them. Given the role of municipalities in the licensing rounds, do local authorities have sufficient resources and knowledge to secure justice in energy transition? That could also go to the two researchers in the panel. And I'm going to add on the second one. How can the onshore wind process become more efficient? Are the municipalities too often engaged during the process?
Well, I think the answer to the first one is it's different between our municipalities, but in general, I think the answer is no. It's incredibly difficult for small municipalities, as we have our small municipality in Tromsø, Stavanger, with 986 inhabitants. You know, they don't have a big administration that can solve all these planning issues. And of course, when in our municipalities, when the big wind power project comes, it's the one project that that administration will plan. in their maybe whole career in the municipality administration. So I think that we need to solve how do we make sure that we have a level that can support the municipalities. And we have suggested that the county could have such an advisory role because we have more resources that we can make sure to help the municipalities in the planning.
And a better overview, maybe, as well.
Yeah, but
the region.
it's difficult. Yeah.
To Håkon and Claudia, do you want to
We,
comment?
we did a survey on this to the municipalities, asking this very question when the changes in the licensing scheme was proposed but not adopted yet. And the general response we got from most of the municipalities was that they did not feel that they were equipped resource-wise in the current constellation, but that they could potentially upscale.
So what did they need? What did they say? How did they want to solve it?
They need manpower, basically, in terms of, but also competence, and they need planners to manage this. It's a different scale of a project compared to what they usually do. So and when they meet a developer for the first time, they have never done anything with this. So they're beginners in a sense, most of them, and that has. We've seen that in several of the case studies we've done on the previous processes as well. But I think something like that you propose to find competence at the level of the county or something like that could be helpful. And that's also indications we received from some of the municipalities.
Claudia, would you like to comment?
Yeah,
as well?
I was thinking, just from my own experience for conducting our research, we do energy cafes at Bellevåg. I agree that probably municipalities don't have the necessary tools to be able to know what is justice, how do you get people to engage. But since we had this collaboration with Bellevåg to bring researchers there, students there to inform the community, then the community becomes more informed about what are the alternatives out there. Do you really need to only have wind? Can we have something else? What is the danger of having hydrogen? All these conversations are starting to take place. So I think there's a role for universities and researchers to play in ensuring that the information is out there for them to understand.
A quite interesting question from the audience. It's a foreigner question, that's a disclaimer. Are there any Sami-owned renewable energy developers? It seems they would be well equipped to build trust and identify popular project ideas. Petter, you're probably the closest one to know that.
There is one project which is sort of owned by FEFO, which Claudia mentioned, and FEFO is owned also or controlled by the Sametinget, and Fylkeskommunen has the county has the other board. Yeah, so they are involved in that, which is at Utfor Havøysund, another small fishery village in Finnmark, which there are quite a few of. Yeah.
Good. I'm going to come back to audience questions later because a couple of you have mentioned the concept of security. And there's a question, how can energy production contribute to security in the Arctic? And I would like for you to define the term security first, because when I've spoken to you beforehand, I get the feeling that you're defining it differently. To Håkon, for instance, I think that you talk about the continued delivery of energy when you're talking about security, aren't you?
It's a slippery notion, of course,
it is.
security. In terms of energy security, it's, of course, being able to have electricity in your socket at any given time.
Stable connection in a way.
Delivery. Yeah, but of course there are other aspects. You touched on data centers as facing the geopolitical changes, and energy is a crucial element in any security aspect, I think. Just by, we have talked about diminishing populations. You can see electricity as you see narratives like lifeblood of society, and it's a necessary condition for developing economic and other types of development. So I think that all of those has security aspects tied into it.
And in the region where Bellevåg is in East Finnmark, they do import energy during the winter from Russia through a line, and They have a hydropower where the dam controls are on the river, on the Russian side of the river. So if they want to do something, we can also be affected. They don't have to do it directly.
Yeah.
So it is about energy security and national security ties together. And also, I mean, security is what, it depends on what you look at. If it's energy or it's national security, they have different definition. But when we talk about energy security, the way I see it is you have to ensure that your critical infrastructure can function even in the phase of energy supply cut. Also that not many people want to live out of nowhere, right? But we need them. We need those communities to continue to survive because it's part of also a security reasons. Because you want to know what's happening around your borders. So if the energy security can help to have communities around Norway, then you don't have to spend so much money on defense.
Defense by people. Hilde, you raise your hand.
No, on a similar note, I think it's a good question, and there are so many security aspects to energy, and one is around how do you sort of ensure your critical infrastructure, etc., and protect energy assets. But at least the way I have spoken about it, I was thinking also more of the security of supply, and then I think that's important both in a local and national setting, but also in European setting or geopolitical setting. And I think we've seen the weaponizing of energy, particularly since the Ukraine invasion, and how that has been used by Russia as a weapon, really. So really ensuring that you have reliable and secure energy supply is the main dimension, as I spoke about.
The bigger the system, the larger the vulnerability, I guess, as well. Petter?
Yeah, both bigger in size, but also in distance.
Yeah.
My colleague Marit, she's in the audience here, she lives in Vadsø. Her closest McDonald's is Murmansk. That's sort
doesn't
of
visit that much anymore, I guess.
No, she doesn't. But that gives sort of what we basically are talking about also when talking about security. And Kirkenes is the example where the mining was the big cornerstone. That went bust in 2015 or something and had major impacts on the city, the optimism, and so on. Now the mine is sort of in play again, and they are looking to start that up. But they have only been able to reserve 21 megawatts. They need more in order to make it an electrical mine. So they also take the climate change into consideration. But due to the grid connection, the security of supply, that isn't viable as of today. And that's not down only to the fact that we need to produce more electricity. That's mainly down to the grid connection going to eastern Finnmark. Where there are more power outs than I think anywhere else in Norway.
Yeah.
Close to the border to Finland, Russia.
To Russia, yeah. Statnett is unfortunately not here to reply to questions and so on for the central grid, at least the transmission grid. I just wanted to have a look at the audience to see if anyone, because I have been receiving a lot of questions through Slidos. That's great. But if anyone has something they would like to say in a microphone, you have got the chance now before we're going to go towards the end. So yeah, we have a question, and there's a microphone on its way to you. While waiting for it, it would be nice to introduce yourselves when you ask the question. And yeah, there you go. It's on. Yeah, just keep it close to your mouth, please.
I don't. Okay. I think it's okay. Sorry. Hi, I'm Anushka Rajagopalan. I'm from the University of Edinburgh. I just had questions overall, just on the biology side of things when it comes to these infrastructures. I've been writing a lot of different types of concerns that I've had or questions. For example, when you're talking about wind onshore planning, and infrastructures, what exactly are the steps to monitor potential issues like making infrastructure on lands with reindeer grazing and migrational routes? Are there any plans specifically when talking about wind offshores, infrastructures to monitor things like, you know, these micro ecosystems that are being developed on each of these infrastructures? When there were talks on, you know, the wind parks before, are there plans in place to monitor any situations where there are unnecessary discharges from these ammonia and nutrients that are being produced that could potentially cause eutrophication situations? So I've just been curious exactly what are these steps. And I know that there was a flow chart before on one of the slides talking about how the first step for these is usually a planning initiative, and how exactly are things like EIAs and professional experts in biology involved in those types of first steps, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. Who feels inclined to reply to this? Because this is also a huge discussion when it comes to any kind of nature invading projects at the moment, not only for energy. So how are we making sure that the biological consequences of any type of project is taken care of? Hilda, I can see that you're raising your hand.
Yes, and then I'm aware we don't have any onshore power projects in Norway with the kind of reindeer issues, so please also others. But I can comment on how we do this for offshore wind developments, for example, in the UK and Scotland. And one of the things we have done, of course, we do environmental baseline studies, etc. We've used our offshore floating wind park in Hywind Tampen a lot outside of Scotland Hywind Scotland, to monitor both coexistence with fisheries, but also to do a lot of surveys and research. But we've also established these kind of biodiversity-specific, asset-specific overviews of species per installation. So and also the sort of criticality of those, so that you can mitigate according to the mitigation hierarchy and follow up. So I think that is, and we're also collaborating with Fornybar Norge, which is the renewable energy association in Norway, and other developers also on these more kind of nature positive methodologies. How can you account for nature in a better way? Because that is difficult and there is no standardized methodology. So a sort of standardized way of taking account of nature also onshore, I think, would be very welcome by the industry.
We are going to add on the final question, and it's kind of following up this question from the audience, looking at the way forward. So the question is, how can researchers, politicians, and industry collaborate to strengthen the Arctic through energy solutions that ensure both growth and sustainability? And what you think the sustainable energy future looks like. And I would like Hilda to start. And I could also add, there's one question that has received quite a lot of votes. And it's more like a comment with a question as well. Electrifying Melkøya feels like fixing a broken leg with a sticky tape. Are there more meaningful plans at Equinor? So putting that into the collaborative efforts, as you were just mentioning for offshore projects, how can you make your activities even better?
Well, I think I wouldn't classify Hammerfest LNG as a broken leg. I think it's a very important both employer and part of the energy system actually for Europe. I think this has to do with, you know, the pace of transition, and we would all like it to go fast and faster, but it does take time. And for us, the most meaningful contribution, I think, is to continue to deliver oil and gas with the lowest possible emissions as we transition, but really contributing to developing also what can replace it in the longer term. And that is the renewable projects we have. We're involved in 3 mega projects right now, including the world's largest offshore wind farm in the UK, Dogger Bank. And also carbon capture and storage, for example, the Northern Lights project, which is now ready to receive CO2 as we speak in Øygarden outside of Bergen. So we need to have several thoughts in our head at the same time, and electrification is a small but necessary part of that.
Thank you. Petter?
I think that we need to change sort of the mindset, what's been done in the past. We have a project in Ski Nord, which is actually financed by Equinor, not the size of the project Hilde mentioned, but could be something which we truly believe in. It's a project called Empowering Northern Societies. We will focus on 3 main areas. It's the market access, technology development, and then the society side of things. We need in Northern Norway to do more developing technology. We need to position ourselves higher in the industrial value chains, which are today, but also in the future.
And we need more competence.
And we need more competence. And we need to connect researchers and industry to do so. We need a better understanding of the future market. Where would sort of Berlevåg deliver hydrogen to? What's Berlevåg's market for hydrogen, for instance? And then the society side. How can we, and the main goal for that sort of focus area is it possible to have a safe and fact-based public debate on what we are talking about now? As it seems now, it's not, but we mustn't lose the belief that we can do it. It can be safe for everyone, whether you are on that side and this side. You can be safe and speaking your mind. And just one example for one of the biggest wind farm project, which was in Finnmark, which now it's not moving on. They had a guy named Ørjan who was working as a local stakeholder person, the information man on that project. He was on Facebook, and there were a lot of comments, and one in particular: is it possible to staple that man's mouth shut?
Really?
Yeah. That's sort of the climate today. We cannot accept that, any one of us.
So keep on talking.
Yeah.
Benjamin?
Well, on the question on how to ensure the successful transition, I've written down this, so I say what I want to say. But we have to agree, I think, I agree with Petter, we have to agree on the understanding of what is needed in our region, and we need to find a common ground for that. If we are to succeed with that, we have to meet each other in friendly and open discussions. And I think the green energy transition is not a choice whether or not we like it or whether or not it's going to happen. It is going to happen because we have to make sure that we cut climate emissions, and we also have to make sure that the Arctic is still a place where we can live, work, and thrive as a region. So I think that we have to find common ground and understanding of what we need to come forward.
And prioritize better when it comes to land use as well, I guess. I just added that. Thank you, Benjamin. Claudia?
Yeah, like I have shown how long it took to build a wind park. We know that gas and oil is not going to be there forever. In fact, the Directorate Resource Report shows that by 2050, the resources could be close to zero. And 2050 is only 25 years from now. It took 25 years to build that wind park. So we really need to start to think about how we can accelerate the development of new industries and what kind of industry outside of the petroleum industry. We need to, because that resource is going to run out. And also I think that we have so much things to learn from the Sami in terms of the biology impact, because I think there's a gap between the traditional knowledge of how to protect the environment and the scientific world. I think if we can combine the two knowledge worlds, then we can probably achieve better design for technologies. Technologies are not stagnant. They change all the time. We can do something to improve them, for example, to minimize the impact of nature from wind turbines or ammonia pollution.
Thank you. Tor Håkon, you get the final word.
I think I first want to address Anushka's question a little bit before, if that's okay, because you were asking about the environmental impact assessment, I think, and I think it's important to emphasize that that is the main tool for mapping biological, environmental, and social conflicts of any project of any kind that is related to energy. A lot has happened quite a few things has happened in terms of developing this tool. So the mapping exercises have improved since before 2019 at least, with the changes that happened subsequently. But it's still, I'm sure, areas to develop there. Yeah.
And then over to how you can collaborate.
Yes.
Yes.
I think the main thing is because one of the things I wouldn't completely agree with is that electrification is a small part of the changes. This, I tried to show that it's one of the crucial bits of the energy transitions that we're going through, which includes digitalization, diversification, all sorts of changes. But the electrification does not mean increased use of energy. It means that we shift the system over to electricity use, and this is what we need to do to replace partly the fossil fuels that we have in our own system. Still halfway there, with still 50% to replace.
Yep.
So doing that, the main obstacle currently is the grid, as we have talked about, and new production. But I think researchers like myself and Claudia, our job is to be critical and ask the constructive but critical questions, and thereby, I think, collaborating widely to push forward, help addressing injustices in the longer run for the benefit of the system and the development. So that's my take on it a bit. I think we talk to anyone, and we also kick in every direction as independent researchers. So that's what I'm going
Please
to
continue to do that. Thank you so much. Now, I want to thank the panel, but before I do that and give them and yourselves a nice round of applause, I noticed that there were questions regarding hydrogen. There's going to be a hydrogen specific event here tomorrow at 1:30. I think it's the room next door, somewhere in this area, where we're going to discuss hydrogen in a Nordic and Arctic perspective. Also, there have been a lot of questions regarding indigenous rights, and there is an event at 5:30 this afternoon about specifically indigenous rights in the energy transition. And I think that's going to be actually in this room. So continue to ask questions, continue to discuss. And for the 5 of you also, thank you so much for coming here today and discussing and sharing your knowledge and experiences. So a huge round of applause to Benjamin Furli, Petter Bjørkli, Hilde Rød, Tor Håkon Indeberg, and Claudia Cheng for participating, and to yourselves as well. Thank you so much.